Dusty shelves, their whispering tales, silent voices in the night prevail. Pages torn but stories intact, each spine a world that's expertly packed. History's ghosts rise from every page, woven yarns from a bygone age. Golden mysteries with secrets tight, Agatha's plots in the candlelight. Turn the page, let the words flow. Through Austen's eyes, see hearts aglow. Secondhand magic, new worlds to chart. In this bookish heart we start.
Hi, my name is Talia. Welcome to Talia Nerds Out. I realized that after doing several physical book reviews, I probably should hit some of the Kindle reviews for last year, just before I forget about them. So the first one, the one for this video, will be the one I did on Charles Dickens. I borrowed this book initially from Hoopla, and then when that book ran out on Hoopla, I switched over to Libby. And that is Charles Dickens by Claire Tomlin. And it took me it took me 21 days to read this, and I read it in November. I gave it 4 stars. I actually really enjoyed this book. I started off the book actually really liking Dickens, even though I knew going into it that there was a point later in his life that I probably would not be too happy with him. And it took a while longer to get to that point than I realized. And then after that point, I darn near hated the man. And if you're not familiar with Dickens' story, a lot of his early life, you can look at things like, I think I've always heard that like David Copperfield is probably a good example of what his life was like. Just some of he lived a life where his father was imprisoned for not paying debts, and Charles was forced to work in order to try to get enough money to pay off the debt so his dad could be released from debtor's prison. Now, sadly, they kept him working for a long time afterwards, in spite of the fact, I want to say, it's hard for me to remember how much time afterwards. It was at least a year or 2 afterwards. They continued keeping him working, even though they should have, he felt like they should have let him back to go to school, like his sister was able to do. His sister even was able to go to music school, and he felt a lot of times that they put more effort in her education than his. And he always felt hurt by that. But it talks about his early life, in not only his early life, but it talks about him getting into writing first as a reporter, and then as he started doing more and more different kinds of writing, then they started getting more with creative writing, talks about Oliver Twist, and all the different works as they came out. And honestly, made me want to read his work. And part of why I ended up reading this book about Charles Dickens is because Tristan and the Classics had mentioned Dickens, and he mentioned in brief part of Dickens' life. And I was like, oh, that sounds like he had a really interesting life. Let me read about him. Now, he did have a very interesting life. You learn, besides about his books, you learn about some of the issues with copyright. Like, the author really didn't have rights of copyright, in the same way that we think of now. Like, there are people who were taking his work and publishing it in America, and he had no royalties going on. It took a long time for him to work out something where he was actually getting paid for his stuff in America. And it drove him insane. It took a long time for him to even like America. After a while, his first visit there, he wrote a scathing book about his time in America and really turned some of his American audience against him. But he got himself back in their good graces, and America got it back in his good graces after a while. So then he absolutely loved America. I think part of it had to do with fixing the publishing issue, and then I think his visit the second time around was better. But you hit a point when he hits middle age, and that's where everything kind of goes downhill, and just some of his personal life he shows the worst aspects of himself. And this comes in regards to his marriage, his family life in general. You do have to read the book if you're not familiar with Dickens's life. I don't want to ruin it for you, but it was not his best showing ever. And he did lose friends because of it, because they couldn't understand why he was behaving the way he was. Now, he also cut off friends who didn't agree with him. He was that way. He was a very sensitive man. And it was either like he thought that you were like the greatest person, or he might consider you then a scallywag. Like, he could be either way, either extreme about how he considered you. But yeah, it was a very interesting book to read. I thought that was very well told. I ended up finding a couple of other books I wanted to read because of it. One was about the, I don't think halfway house is quite the right term. It was a house that was Dickens's kind of like secret pet project that he gave to anonymously, and he set up anonymously. It was for women, fallen women, who he wanted them to help them get to a better life, and then they could either get settled in England, but a lot of times they were given opportunity to go to Australia or one of the other colonies to start anew. And there is a book that talks about the lives of the women who were at these houses, who were affected by Dickens taking them in. Not into his own personal house. It was run by, it was his brainchild, and he was deeply involved in its mechanisms, but he had a woman who was the financier behind it, and then he had a woman who would live on premises to keep things in order and to make sure that these girls actually did begin the process of reformation, so that way when they did go out to the colonies or wherever they ended up after this house, they could have a chance of really getting a new start and not ending up in the same place that they were, whether it be thieving, prostitution, whatever it was that they were doing before Dickens found them and gave them this chance to remake themselves. Of course, this book can't help but touch on some of Dickens's stuff with Christmas. I did find a couple of books about Dickens and Christmas based off of this. I did end up, I don't know where my copy of Dombey and Son is, but this book made me want to read Dombey and Son. It made me want to read quite a few of his books. I have several of them that in an anthology that I still need to finish reading. I've already read Tale of Two Cities. I've already read Christmas Carol. But I have to read Oliver Twist, and I want to say it's David Copperfield that's in there as well. I don't think it's Great Expectations. It might be Great Expectations. But regardless, I do have several Dickens's works that this book made me want to read. It also made me want to read, although you can't really find it for a good price. His friend Forrester wrote I want to say it was a 2-volume biography on him, where he was actually pretty honest and didn't necessarily make any effort to hide Dickens's flaws. And they were like that through their lives. Like, that was his best friend. And before he had died, like even long before he died, Dickens had told Forster, "You are the person I want to write my biography." And this was the first person he told about his childhood struggles, and about how some of these stories touched on his experiences as a child. But the other book that I couldn't find, but I wanted to, and unfortunately it's just not available, one of his daughters talked to a biographer and wanted to give the full view of her father, including his flaws, partially because she felt guilty that she had not taken her mother's side more, that her mother's side had been completely ignored for the most part publicly during her father's life. So that biography I cannot find, which is incredibly disappointing to me because I want to read that biography. I want to hear what she deemed as an important story to tell that her other family members couldn't not quite forgive her for, but they couldn't believe that she would let that kind of thing be printed. And I just really wish I knew that I could read what was in that book. But this was quite a decent sized book. I can't remember how many pages. Like I said, I was reading it on 2 different apps. I started off on Hoopla as an audiobook, and then I switched over to Libby, reading it in a Kindle form. And I can't remember how long the book was. Once I switched to Kindle form, it went so fast. Now, I did love, like, the little bit of fun things in there. Like, there'd be references to people like Elizabeth Gaskell, who knew him at least to write to. And because she wrote social commentary in her writing was of interest to him as well, and his writing was of interest to her. And another story that came up was the fact that he ended up meeting a young girl who later on became an author in her own right. And I don't want to give away the story for that, so you're going to have to read the book. But this was a really enjoyable book, even for someone who struggled to really like Dickens at times, particularly towards the end. I appreciated the fact that Dickens wasn't sugar-coated in this. You got to see his good parts and his bad. You got to see the man who really he really wanted to work for social justice, and he did a lot. But then there was the other aspects to him that were not so nice, and those parts are covered as well. He was a complex character, and this book, I believe, does him justice. So once again, that is Charles Dickens' A Life by Claire Tomlin, and I gave this 4 stars. I think I honestly only gave it 4 stars because I didn't care for Dickens himself. There really wasn't anything against the book itself. Just not every book can get a 5-star. It's a good book. I thoroughly enjoyed the book. I probably won't pick it up, which is probably what got it 4 stars, because it's not a book I can see myself going, oh, I'm going to reread that. Not because it wasn't an enjoyable read. I could see myself reading more of this author's books, but I don't see myself reading this book again because I don't want to spend that much time with Dickens the man again. I don't mind looking at his work, but whereas I might want to read his buddy writing about him, who apparently wrote a really good biography, or if I could find that one that his daughter wrote. I can see wanting to read small parts of, different points of view, but I don't see rereading this book because I've read it. It's not one of those ones where I have had history books where I'm going to totally read that again. Let me pick that up. That's not this book. But still very good. I do recommend reading it. If you have your favorite biography about Dickens, please put it in the comments. If this is your favorite biography about Dickens, put that in there as well. If you have a favorite Dickens book, I want to hear about that too. Otherwise, thank you very much for joining me for this video, and I will see you again for the next one. God bless. Bye.